Hello and welcome to Teaching My Cat to Read, the very serious book review podcast. I'm Eli.
I'm Em.
And I'm Lottie. And this week we're discussing everything about Emma by Jane Austen.
You know how difficult it is to find anything on Tumblr about this when the title is literally just some girl's name? Like, so
Did you try
annoying.
searching for?
Oh my days.
Did you try searching for the book where everybody is wrong about everything all the time?
I feel we need to point out, so this is our fourth Austen now. So we've done Persuasion, we've done Pride and Prejudice, and Northanger Abbey, and Sense and Sensibility, so it's our fifth.
Did we do Mansfield Park or no?
No, we haven't done
we
Mansfield
haven't.
Park. That's the last one.
That's what I thought this was the last Austen we had left to do, and I was like, wait, when did we do Mansfield Park? I'm sure we've done it, but we haven't. Okay, cool.
No, that's fine. That can be series 4.
We're going to have to find some Austen equivalent to replace as one of our regular classics.
If anyone's got any suggestions, you can email them to us at teachingmycattoread@gmail.com, because we are happy to have all book recommendations of classic genre, and we will add them to our ever-extending long list that we will then pick from.
Very, very long list.
If the book is very lucky, it will end up on the medium long list, or maybe even the shorter than the medium long list, but still pretty long list.
Yeah. And then we narrow it down. If you want to hear our full list of how we choose our books, you can go listen to our planning episode, which we recorded at the start of the series, which was a lot of fun.
Stop plugging our other episodes before we even got like 5 minutes into this one. Does anybody have a terrible summary for this book?
Everybody is wrong about everything all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Emma is spoiled, full of herself, needs to be taken down a peg or two, and dear God, the snobbery is at levels Lady Catherine de Bourgh would love to achieve, featuring boiled vegetables and gruel.
Oh my God, should we all have a basin of gruel? I think I sent that line. I've been messaging Em today because I speed read this today, having put it off for ages because my life is in shambles. And I was thinking that I'd psyched myself up to really hate it, and I actually really enjoyed this book. And I did not dislike Emma as much as I was expecting to, because dear God, there are so many other less there are so many other less likable characters, and I'm sure we'll yell about that later as well. But so I was messaging Em with like bits from the book that I was like, and the line where the dad is just like, should we all just have some nice gruel? It's like, no one's ever said that
you ask this of me. What the hell?
He's my least favourite character, I think, which is
100%
an achievement in this book.
Agree.
I mean, Mrs. Elton is up there as well.
Have you guys read this book before? Because I personally hadn't. I hadn't read this book before.
I'd read an abridged version, and I'd seen both the adaptation with Romola Garai and Johnny Lee Miller and the recent film, but I had not read the original text.
I read it a long time ago when I was working my way through the Austens. And I think I finished Emma when I didn't finish Persuasion, which just goes to show that young Em did not understand about Jack. I think I made it to a chapter of Persuasion and I gave up, and I somehow slogged through the whole of Emma, even though I remember thinking at the time that it was a slog.
That's very apt, because Persuasion is about like growing up and knowing better.
Yeah. I mean, I am pretty sure I definitely read Pride and Prejudice, and then I remember, I think this was the other one we had at home, and I was like, oh, I'll open it up and flick through it, and I think I got to the first few couple of lines, and I knew Mr. Lightning and an Emma were a thing. I don't know how, must have been just through pop culture osmosis, I guess. But
that most powerful of forces.
when I realised that he was 38 and she was 21, it completely put me off the book.
I really can't get past that.
We are gonna have to time box that one. But
no, we will have to time box it.
It's f***ed up, and
I feel it is less,
I don't like it.
It is
that's my whole
messy than Sense and Sensibility, in my opinion. I do feel like I did a bit of a 180 on them as a unit, if you ignore the age gap, because that still is a bit ick to me.
Yeah,
I think that's why I like the BBC adaptation that's 4 episodes, because they appear much closer in age. Romola Garai and Johnny Miller do not look like they have a massive age gap.
I don't think I've ever seen an adaptation that doesn't close that gap, if not in the actors' actual ages, just how they're playing it.
Exactly.
Which I think is a solid choice, honestly.
Yeah, the whole bit where he's like, I was 16 when you were born, he explicitly says that, and I'm just like,
No,
wrong.
no, thank you.
There is a callback to, I guess, them as characters where Emma thinks she knows everything, yet knows nothing, and Mr. Knightley knowing quite a lot about life because he is 16 years older than Emma.
I tell you what, that was actually interesting to me, because I think when I walked into this, I think I'd, presumably from a previous adaptation or the last time I'd read it, I walked in with the assumption that Knightley was, like, reliable as a perspective and that he knew what was going on basically all the time. And then the book was actually very surprising to me, because it turns out not only does he most of the time not actually really know what's going on, Emma lies to his face on multiple occasions and he doesn't pick it up. He thinks she's genuinely in love with Frank Churchill. Yeah, it was a very odd, because I kind of walked in expecting him to be kind of, reliable. And it turns out he knows about Jack also. He's just mildly less of a dick than Emma is.
Would you say that she lies to him about Frank Churchill? Because I don't think she ever says to anybody, like, I'm in love with him.
Sorry, I don't think she lies. So that is a different thing. There are multiple conversations that they have where Emma, because she's playing a part as part of her continued, like, managing everybody around her thing, ends up in the position where she's arguing for a position she doesn't hold, and Knightley is arguing for the position she does hold, and they have that whole conversation, and Knightley does not once twig that she's lying through her teeth the whole time and finding this all extremely funny.
Right. So there's a point when you mentioned her, like, managing everyone around her. I saw a post you reblogged, which I thought was really, really interesting, which is that she's had to do that her whole life. Like, her dad has to be managed. Yeah. And so that's just what she knows. And it may be a hell of a lot more sympathetic to that as a behaviour that she has. Yeah,
definitely. I definitely found one of the things that I was reluctantly sympathetic, well, not reluctantly, but I found it difficult to separate how difficult I found the book to read from how difficult Emma is as a character. But the fact that she's constantly manipulating everybody, and she's always, like, trying to smooth things over, and she's lying all the time in whatever way she thinks will make, like, the current
people
social gathering pass most painlessly.
She so doesn't like people as well.
Yeah, she's very much like, she is just constantly, like, pretending to like people more than she actually does, just for, like, the manners.
She's like, how can I get a good grade in people?
Yes.
A little bit. Which I hesitate to say, because, like, to me that is an autistic trait, and I don't think that I read her that way otherwise. But she is constantly like, how can I do the correct social thing that's going to help people out?
Yeah.
But she just doesn't have the empathy to do the correct thing.
Compared to the other Austens that we've read, I think that's the thing that jumped out the most at me in this book is, I think, I guess a clear example would be in Pride and Prejudice, when Lady Catherine de Bourgh comes round to see Lizzie and says, you can't marry my nephew because you are the daughter, you are not of, like, the same class system. And there's kind of a clear distinction between money there, but that's kind of it, really, on a surface level. Whereas this book takes the class system and really brings it into focus. Like, for Emma, I think Emma has she's got a bit of a shit situation, because from the age of 12, she's basically mistress of the household. Her mother's passed away. Her sister's married. Her dad's basically depressed because her sister's left. And then she's trying to manage her dad's emotions by the actions of everybody around her. So she has no sense of... She has freedom, and she also doesn't, because she basically knows that she can't leave her father, because out of guilt, really, she leaves him. If she gets married and leaves him, he'll be by himself. He has no friends. The only person he really talks to is Mr. Perry. He's a massive introvert, and he's also
He does like his servants.
Yeah.
He is, like, repeatedly, he's on good terms.
I tell you what, I'm going to quibble with the idea that he has no friends. I don't think that's true. I think he's friends with the Bates, he's friends with the Westons, he's friends with the Knightleys. It's just that those relationships are very difficult for him to maintain because he doesn't like to leave the house.
And because he's never had to, because Emma will do it all for him. She arranges the card tables, she arranges the dinners.
She sort of manages his life to the extent that Emma herself doesn't really have any friendships. Like at the start when Miss Taylor leaves, for the whole book, like the dad is like, oh, poor Miss Taylor, oh, poor Miss Taylor, oh, poor Isabella, because Isabella's gone and got married to John Knightley, you know, what was it, 9 years prior. And for Emma, if you imagine like a 12-year-old in that situation just being fed that narrative day in, day out, like, oh, poor this, poor that, don't get married. And then on the flip side, society's expectations for Emma as a 21-year-old singleton, whether she inherits the house or not, which I don't think she would. It's not. I don't think it's mentioned.
No, I think she would.
She would inherit. So she's got a lot of agency there, and therefore she's very eligible, but she just isn't interested in marriage. But also,
although I think partly, like, she is shown that she doesn't just swallow everything that her dad says. You know, her dad is all just like, oh, poor Mrs. Taylor, she's had to go and get married. And Emma's like, look, I really fucking miss her, but this is a good thing for her, and I'm going to balance that against my own personal sadness.
I guess it's more that she's aware that if she did the same thing as Miss Taylor, it would upset her father a lot, and therefore she has made this decision that she doesn't want to get married. I think it's either ever or for a period of time. At least that's how I read it. And compared to the other Austen books, it's a different discussion. So like in Pride and Prejudice, because Lizzie and Jane, they have to get married to go up in society. Emma is effectively, if she's atop of the tree in the local social circle, she has nowhere to go, really, unless she goes to marry the Lord.
Jane and Lizzie don't have to get married to go up in society. They have to get married in order to be able to continue subsisting, right? Like,
yeah. Well, because we see in this what happens if you don't, right? Like what happened to the Mrs. and Miss Bates.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have that financial security, you know, you can end up in a very precarious situation.
I would like to put forward a theory here, which is that Emma has essentially been raised to always have to manage everybody around her, mostly her dad, but also, like, you know, she has to manage all of her dad's acquaintances so that he doesn't end up miserable and alone.
Yeah.
And when you are that kind of person, when you have those kind of, like, in the same way that can come out of sort of more direct abuse, but like she's been kind of parentified for her dad almost, right?
Yeah.
It's when you have that scenario, it's very difficult to think of what you want for yourself. And so for her to be constantly matchmaking on behalf of other people and trying to arrange things and not for herself and go, I can't think about that for myself.
Yeah.
But to cloak it in, oh, well, because I couldn't leave my dad, or, oh, because I've never liked anyone. My proposal is that that's what's really going on with her, is that she's so focused on her duty to other people, even if she goes about it like completely cack-handedly, that she's actually very unselfish.
Yeah.
Again, to the detriment of herself and others.
I don't think I think she's very naive, and she is very spoiled by the product of her circumstances, being born into this affluent family.
But not in a way that makes the only thing she's personally, like, the only way that she thinks of herself as actually as a person rather than as somebody who inhabits her station. The only way that she thinks of herself as being personally superior is that she's clever, which is true.
See, I don't know. I think she one of the things that made her a really difficult protagonist for me was that every time I found myself going, oh, see, look, she does care, or she is trying, or here is an example of her being compassionate and selfless, it would almost always, or it felt that way anyway, be followed by her saying something so unbearably snobbish and looking down on people for, you know, particularly for a modern reader, like very trivial things, that I found that quite I think that's an aspect of her superiority that I think, particularly when the book is so concerned about class, I think it's worth remembering
Personally, I think it's I guess a product of her circumstance. And as a modern reader, there are definitely sections like with Harriet Smith, who is the local girl who goes to a boarding school, but basically, I've Googled this, she's a parlour boarder, so they effectively paid more to have her own room and board. And so Emma thinks she is from this very affluent family because she's a parlour boarder.
Emma knows that she is an unclaimed natural daughter, but Emma has got it into her head that that might be of a noble person, and that Harriet is secretly, you know, the heir to something. And there's a book that she and Harriet talk about that has that as a plot.
Yeah. What do you think about the parallels between that and Northanger Abbey? Because in Northanger Abbey, like, Catherine basically takes the idea of Gothic literature and just runs with it to the point where it causes distress because she's just got the completely wrong end of the
I mean,
stick.
I don't know that Emma's sort of treatment of Harriet in that is like, I think she sort of post hoc justifies the way that she's been sort of taking Harriet under her wing and giving her ideas of like her status.
The fact that she likes her as much as she does.
That's why she does it.
She's trying to give her things or sort of imbue her with social status that she doesn't have, so Emma doesn't have to feel the contradiction in how affectionate she is towards Harriet and how much she likes her compared to her normal, like, sort of, I am superior,
disinterested
these people are beneath me.
Yeah. And so post hoc she makes up this idea, she sort of goes, oh, well, I'm sure she must be the daughter of somebody important because I like her so much.
Yeah.
So it's not so much that Emma has taken this fantasy, I think, but that she has to find a justification within the paradigm that she's in of all these class restrictions and frameworks.
I think it is a really strong quality of hers that she's, and it's a lot subtler than Kathy, because I think with Kathy it's very Catherine, it's very she's very much imprinted on these novels and she doesn't have very much experience and her instincts are good. But her frame of reference is almost entirely this fictional Gothic. So she misinterprets what she sees rather than she's usually right about the vibes being good or rancid, but she's not right about why. And I think, but Emma has, in some ways, I think Emma works on less evidence, but spends a lot of time. I mean, one of my terrible summaries for this book was the Make Up a Guy to Be Mad At Olympics. And it's not that she doesn't just make up guys to be mad at, but she would theorize about people's personalities and decisions with very little actual evidence.
Yeah, it's like an incredible, like, the amount of self-delusion that goes on in this book, or talking yourself into or out of a position based on absolutely nothing except
conjecture.
And like Jane Fairfax being cold and slightly odd to Emma for reasons that nobody can understand until later in the book. Emma goes, oh, well, she must be hiding something. And to be fair to Emma, Jane Fairfax is. But from there, Emma goes and like decides so solidly that she must be sort of having an affair with her brother-in-law that she says this to other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's people talking themselves into and out of positions in this book like crazy.
Yeah, it's a really big. I mean, that was the thing that really struck me actually with the sort of the resolution of Harriet's arc, is that Emma is completely unaware for like the whole novel pretty much that Harriet is still basically at every point in the book still sufficiently in love with Robert Martin that if he'd asked her to marry him again she would have said yes. But the way that what Emma's tracking of Harriet's preferences is completely unrelated. I mean, it's not without foundation, but because some of it is a lot of it in fact is Harriet actually saying, "Oh, I'm in love with Mr. Elton. I won't stop talking about him," or whatever. But one of the things that I found really striking was that absolutely nobody in this book knows what anybody else is thinking, and anytime they think they do, they're proven to be wrong.
Yeah.
And this is happening for everybody. Like Frank Churchill being convinced that Emma knows that he's not really into her, for example.
And he just completely got lucky that she wasn't more badly hurt by what was going on.
Yeah. And the thing is, I mean, I wonder if that's the one where his instincts are good, in that he kind of goes, well, I can tell she's not really into me and we're just having fun.
And therefore she's a safe person for me to use as cover. And the thing is that he's actually not wrong there.
Yeah, and also that he's kind of assumed that she'll be able to tell the same thing about him.
Yeah, and he's not wrong that he's not hurting her, but he is hurting his actual fiancé.
And also it is like, it's socially, it's not a great look for either of them.
No.
Yeah, I don't know, I definitely think...
It just complicates everything for both of them.
I think the thing that struck me about this book is the way the class system and its ranks are discussed with the different women in this book. in particular. Like, there's obviously, you know, the different men, but for example, Mrs. Elton, she's I think she's a very rich heiress, but then moves into the society and is so full of herself. Oh god, she's so annoying.
She's the worst character.
She
really
is
dislike
the
her.
actual worst. And then you've got Mrs.
But
and
she's one of the few people we see be actively and intentionally cruel.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because like everybody else is like a bit annoying or a bit rude or a bit awkward, but they're not very rarely
She's
deliberately
mean.
setting out to hurt anybody. Unlike
Yeah.
the Eltons.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you've got Mrs. and Miss Bates, who, I mean, Miss Bates's only real, I guess, character flaw is she can talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, which is one of the things I found quite funny in the audiobook was that it just kept going and going and going. You definitely got this sensation of somebody who just is a bit of a chatterbox, really. I mean, there's no harm in it. She just doesn't stop talking. And
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, it is probably kind of annoying, but she's harmless. You know, she's effectively a spinster.
One thing, I was reading the TV tropes page, and it sort of mentions a couple times that if you actually read through the walls of text, or, you know, listen very carefully to the long sort of her ramblings, you'll pick up on things that nobody else in the book knows
Oh
yet.
yeah,
and
like
she gives
she actually knows the most. She is the most accurate in terms of knowing what's going on.
And she is the character as well who says, oh, I don't pretend to have Emma's like talents for reading people's hearts. Like she's one of the characters who's like, I'm not going to try and interpret and intuit what people are feeling. So her then actually being the most in the know or the most accurate is really funny.
And it's also
I enjoyed that.
It's quite interesting, I feel, like narrative device as well, because I feel Austen uses her as a character to do quite a lot of the, like, I say world building. What's the word phrase for world building in normal non-fantasy books? But that, like, you know, the background filling in of the world is done by
setting the scene.
Mrs. Bates's, like, soliloquies of text.
And it's also a very interesting thing of like, I absolutely skipped past all those walls of text, and therefore I missed out on stuff. And it's just like, oh, I'm like Emma. You know, I discounted this stuff because I was like, this is boring, and therefore I missed stuff. And am I going to go back and reread them? Absolutely not. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting thing as well, is that you as the reader or listener are then rewarded for being a better person than I was.
Yeah. It's a very clever narrative device. I've got a lot of time for that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's very clever. But yeah, so the thing about the class in this book is that I think I disagree that it's more about class than Pride and Prejudice was, because I think Pride and Prejudice is very much about that. But I also think, like, this book is sort of about, I think it's more about you can never know what's going on in someone else's head. And the thing is about the class is that the marriages that end up happening at the end, the people who are happy are the ones who have obeyed the class, like, framework, right?
Yes.
And then Mr. Elton, who's sort of gone, okay, well, I have this much income, I can expect to make this match, and sort of married for money but not class, is presumably miserable because his wife is awful. But then he's kind of awful too, so...
They might be happy in their awfulness together, it's unclear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think, thinking about class, I think the main difference between this book and Pride and Prejudice, in that sense, is that it's not so much that it's more or less about class, but that we see more classes. It's more concerned with people who have less than Pride and Prejudice is. So we meet a lot of people that we, you know, these are, you know, your Mrs. Goddards and your Miss Bates or whatever. They presumably exist in the villages around Netherfield and around Longbourn.
Longbourn.
I remember places' names.
It was our first episode. It was a long time ago.
But like we don't meet those people, and their concerns don't like enter in on the main characters' lives in the same way. Whereas I think this book is this book is the book in terms of 2 or 3 families in a country village is the thing to focus a novel on.
Yeah.
So I think you really feel that it makes it feel the class stuff is more obvious because you see more of a range of it.
Yeah, like we never get to meet the uber rich Churchills. We only meet Frank.
That's a good point, yeah.
Like the poshest family mentioned in this, we don't actually meet in person, as it were.
That's true.
They're mentioned off screen.
But yeah, I was going to say, I think the other way that this book is about class in a way that the others are, and I think aren't, is I think this book is much more concerned with misalliance, in that it talks about it or mismatches It's really tense about being equal to your partner and the various ways in which that
obligation can kill relationships.
Yes, I mean gratitude is a big deal.
Yeah, because very early on you hear about Mr. Weston's first marriage, where he married quote unquote way above his station, and how it actually just was really terrible in that his wife wanted to be his wife, but she didn't want to give up the nice life that she had before, and it ruined her relationship with her parents, and they just weren't happy as a result of it.
Yeah.
And then he marries again to somebody who's much more, like, it's a much better match in terms of expectations and things like that, and they're much, much happier. And so it's not, it's sort of about, it's not just you should marry within your class and that's what's good and proper, but also why that can be true.
And it's not, it's a little, I mean, the other things they talk about are kind of sort of mismatches of intelligence and mismatches of money. One of the complaints that Knightley has about Robert Martin wanting to marry Harriet is he says men of sense don't want silly wives, and that, I mean, I get that's a kind of a theme in Pride and Prejudice, actually, isn't it? That Mr. Bennet marries somebody that's, you know, pretty and flattering and things, and then ends up not being able to respect her, and that causes a huge, you know, that causes a lot of problems.
Yeah. And then you have, like, going back to the money aspect, the imbalanced money aspect. You have Frank Churchill gallivanting around being like, oh, we can just have a secret engagement, it's fine. Not really thinking about the dire straits he's putting his fiancée into, because she's got to decide if she wants to keep turning down job offers, holding out for him to marry her, or if she is going to try and go and be independent and the clock is ticking, and if she keeps waiting for him, she's going to really shoot herself in the foot in terms of having a backup option.
Yeah. On the flip side of that, like, by marrying him, she then catapults herself into I guess a much more,
although everybody who knows them agrees that he got the better end of the deal there.
Yeah. I think it's kind of she is the person who goes up by marrying Frank because she has less money than him, or less income, I guess.
But in order to get there, she has to go through a hell of a lot of uncertainty and risk, which he puts her through because of a lack of empathy.
Well, I mean, you say that, but the thing is that, like, being a governess at that time was also, I mean, like, if Anne Bronte writes a call-out novel about it, you know it's bad. But, like, being a governess at this time was actually, like, an incredibly dangerous, like, it's in very poor taste to a modern audience that Jane Fairfax compares it to slavery at one point, but she has a reason to be doing that, even if it's a very naive middle-class white girl reason to be doing it, and that's because being a governess fucking sucks.
Yeah, I mean, you have this whole passage earlier in the book where it's talking about, like, her childhood and the fact that her adoptive family, essentially, who was the military superiors of her dead father, they can't afford to keep her as a daughter, essentially. They have to prepare her to be able to be independent because there just isn't the money otherwise. Yeah. And so it's like she's in this really awful situation where she knows she's got to either, like, provide for herself, or maybe this dude with whom she has a secret engagement and seems to have, like, no timeline for actually honouring it and is flirting with other people in front of her, maybe he'll make good on it. And she's put in this really precarious, even more precarious situation. Yeah. Because the guy doesn't empathise with what she has to deal with, being of a lower class and much less certain future than him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's another way in which the mismatch causes grief.
Also, like, Jane herself is kind of a bit of a mismatch because she's been given this opportunity through the Campbells to, like, be very well educated, to play instruments very well, to be
in preparation for being a governess, like, all in service of her being employed in the future.
But she is, it's kind of also by the society that I guess she mixes with, like, that sort of weird middle ground. I don't know, that's the kind of feeling I got, like, she didn't exist in the high society world, but she also kind of did by proxy of being, like, with the Campbells. Yeah,
and you get this sort of odd thing where, like, class and money don't always match up. So, like, Mrs. and Miss Bates are actually, like, you know, they were gentry, really. They were perfectly respectable class-wise, but now they have no money. And Jane Fairfax is in a kind of similar boat of having mixed with that higher realm of society, but she can't stay there on her own terms.
Well, then compared to Harriet, who is sort of mixing with people of much higher status than she is, without really being part of that world, and then sort of having to figure out, okay, do I try and marry into this?
Yeah.
What you know, or do I sort of accept that I'm not part of this world?
So this is kind of bringing me back to the misalliance thing again, in that there's also maybe more sort of the it ties up to sort of neither fish nor fowl. There's this kind of, both with Harry, I mean, that's one of the things that Knightley warns Emma about when Emma tells...
Is that you're going to ruin her for actually any of the matches she can hope to make.
You've got her used to upper classes, you've got her used to high expectations, but absolutely nobody in those straits is going to marry her because she was born out of wedlock.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It is kind of, again, it comes back, I feel, the naivety of Emma. She's trying to be a good friend in her naive 21-year-old brain, and just does not realise the consequences of what she's potentially putting Harriet through. Like, she could really screw Harriet's life up.
I mean, she almost does. She almost costs her the marriage that that is right for her.
Yeah.
And I don't know, because this book is so, like you say, it's so much about being equals with the person you marry. And then you still have Emma getting married to someone nearly twice her age. Yeah. It's not only that, it's just, but I think in terms of, the thing that surprised me, actually, and I know we're going to probably skip to like the end of the book, is when I was listening to the audiobook, because in Pride and Prejudice, it ends with them getting married. In Persuasion, it ends with them getting married. In Northanger Abbey, they end by getting married. And then it got to the bit where he proposes to Emma. And I was like, oh, okay, the book's nearly finished now, because I was trying to get through the book.
It goes on for more, like 3 more chapters.
And then it was like, oh, chapter next one. And I was going, tell me how long's left in the book. And they go, oh, another half an hour. And I was going, what? Like,
I honestly, I quite liked that. I quite liked getting to see her be happy and sensible and doing, like, showing off the work of having become a better person that she's done throughout the book. You know, saying all the right things and being kind. And I just really enjoyed seeing the end result of the character development.
But not only that, it was the fact that, like, Mr. Knightley, I mean, if we ignore the age gap, because I've banded on about that in the sensibility episode, how much that gives me just ick. But in terms of, you know, he is effectively saying, yeah, I will marry you, because there's not really anyone else that Emma associates with who would understand Emma's position, where she can't leave her father because of the reliance her father has on Emma.
I mean, Mr. Knightley leaving his enormous fancy house.
Exactly.
We spend a whole chapter basically with Emma going, this is like, Donwell Abbey's incredible. I wish I could spend more time here. I love it. It's presented as idyllic. Yeah. And he's giving it up.
He's willing to say, I will not only give up he's not only giving up his house, but his, you know, what is everyone going to think of that? Like, normally it's the wife moves in with him and he's like, oh, and actually I'm going to move in with her.
Well, it depends. If people who know them know how Mr. Woodhouse is.
Oh, yes.
And like, I think that one of the things he respects about Emma is her commitment to her father.
Yeah.
And like, he and his brother are some of the only people who can also put up with Mr. Woodhouse.
Yeah.
And I think he respects that she has this very genuine and pure commitment to her father, and that she puts him above everything else. She's not flighty about it. It's one of the things she's very serious about.
Well, yeah, she says, oh, hang on a minute, I'm not going to be able to move out because it will make my father very unhappy and I need to put his needs before my own, which in itself is a whole nother, like, go to therapy.
It's a very conscious commitment, though, that she makes.
Yeah.
It's not just because that's the way things are. She's gone, like, I could move out if I wanted to.
Yeah.
And I don't.
Yeah, and I choose not to. And he's willing to say, you know what, how about if I move in with you and live here, then you've got that comfort of A, being married, so she doesn't actually, for want of a better word, have to, quote, worry about finding a husband, because she's pretty independent. She's married someone, so she's sorted, for want of a better word, and she can look after her father.
For having said that, like, earlier, Emma does not have, like, the empathy to do the right thing, even though she's trying. Like, because she doesn't understand what people actually want around her. And to be fair, everybody's lying their ass off all the time, so she's got no hope in hell anyway. But the conversation where Knightley goes, actually, you know, they sit down and go, okay, how can we get married while respecting your commitment to your father? And he goes, okay, no, I've actually been thinking about this. And it's only been a day or something at that point. And he goes, look, I've been thinking about this hard. It's one of the best moments of empathy in the book, because he's gone, I know this is really important to you. I know we need to tackle this together. And I really like that as a relationship moment for them, because...
Yeah, I did as well.
Yeah.
And I like to see relationship negotiation in a romance, actually. I'm a sucker for a conversation where you sit down and go, okay, so we've got some differing needs here, but we're important to each other and we'll make it work.
We'll make a compromise.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's I think it's fascinating that is, this is the Austen novel that does that. It must have happened in prior books. I think I'm sure there's Austen scholars who will be able to talk more on the subject of why it's in, say, this book and less in others, and what this book is trying to say as a comedy of manners. But it's just a really interesting point that, like in all the other books, the guy proposes, they go, yes, I want to get married, job done, they get married. And there's no like, oh, actually, how are we going to sort this out? And it's quite a modern problem solving, I felt.
Because the other thing that needs to be resolved after they have decided they're going to get married is Emma's relationship with Harriet. And because at this point, Harriet has sort of said, oh, I'm in love with Mr. Knightley because he was very kind to her once when she was being humiliated. And Emma has inadvertently encouraged this, and they've both gone, and they're at the point in their relationship where they're just not talking about it because, Emma's realised that she loves Mr. Knightley and so she doesn't want to encourage Harriet anymore, but she doesn't want to be a bad friend, blah, blah, blah. And that's treated with quite a lot of weight. Like, how is she going to be kind to Harriet whilst not giving up or diminishing how happy she is about being able to get married to Knightley, who she loves?
Yeah, which I do like that one actually just gets solved by Robert Martin being like, actually, you know what, I'm going to give it another go. And...
Good on you. Yeah.
He seems like a sweetheart.
Every adaptation has him being just such a sweetheart.
When they were first talking about how she's like, he doesn't usually read, but I recommended these things to him and he read them. And I was like, he's a keeper. He's a keeper within 2 sentences.
Sweet.
I'm like, yep, go for it.
He's so sweet. And like he wrote her a lovely letter at the start. And
And Emma, that's one of my least favourite Emma moments, is she goes, oh, well, I bet he had one of his sisters to write it for him.
Yeah.
But just like, man.
Again, if she's never, at the start of this book, she is not only probably never actually experienced people being honest with her about their feelings in terms of how they, she's only 21, but she's also in a position where she's been brought up either she's parentified to an extent to manage her father's emotions, and secondly,
she's been put in the role of parent without a role model.
And her position in society means she'd probably marry somebody else in society and not necessarily for love, and so her brain just can't comprehend a man actually writing nice things.
I was going to say, this is the thing that I found quite interesting. She's a weird mix of naive and cynical.
Yes,
in that she seems to have the fact that she goes, well, she's like, oh, well, if a woman's pretty and not mean, like, she can have any husband she wants. And Knightley's like, oh, well, men of sense don't want silly wives. And like, it's a weird mix of being very naive in that Knightley's not wrong, that certainly some men are going to be like, actually, I want somebody who can manage my house for me. But she's also right that sometimes men will marry people, unsuitable people, just because they're like rich and pretty. Like, I mean, Mr. Elton is a prime example.
So on Robert Martin's letter, and she goes like, I don't know that it's so much that she can't comprehend men doing nice things out of love for their wives, because her good friends are the Westons, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think what it is it's again a post hoc justification. She has already decided that Harriet cannot marry this man, and any evidence to the contrary that he might actually be a good husband or suitable in any way has to be discarded. Again, it's making up a guy or talking yourself into a position. Like this lovely letter goes against her case, so she has to discredit it somehow.
Yeah.
And like selectively choosing evidence to pay attention to or not to pay attention to.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think this is one of the beats that I think led to the way the most recent film adaptation has kind of, because like the way that plays the Emma Harriet relationship is that there is a semi-subconscious thing on Emma's part where she just doesn't want Harriet to leave, and she's actively sabotaging her relationships with other people because she's so distraught
lonely
about Mrs. Weston leaving.
She's lonely. Yeah, she's so lonely.
yeah, I think the moment with the letter, I think, is one of those beats where you go, I see where they pulled that from. That because she acknowledges, she's surprised. She's like, oh wow, this is genuinely a good letter. And then her immediate sort of turnaround is, but I couldn't associate with somebody who married a farmer. I wouldn't be able to be Harriet's friend anymore. And that's what she uses to get Harriet to say no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's interesting. I have one theory I want to put forward about the snobbery, because that was the bit I think that I made me kind of bounce off it the most. It was the most consistent and least forgivable of Emma's flaws for me. Yep. And I felt, I mean, I've said before, I felt like I bounced off this book a lot, but like one of the things that did it was that every time Emma would seem to do something reasonable or kind or compassionate, she'd follow it up with some really awful snobbery. But I was thinking about perfectionism, and I was thinking about the fact that Emma is very aware, repeatedly throughout the novel, she's very aware that all of the people that love her, with the exception of Mr. Knightley, are wrong about her.
Oh, you're making more and more like neurodivergent Emma arguments here, and I hate.
I mean, yeah, but like she knows she's not that good an artist. She knows she's not that good a musician. She's certainly learning across the course of the books that she doesn't know people as well as she thinks she does. She's not as accomplished as all of her friends say she is. And the only thing that she can, they love perfect Emma, right? And she spends all this time managing their feelings and trying to make sure they're not angry at each other and that everybody's having a good time. And she's faking feelings about like an unspeakable number of her relationships at all times to make
trying to decide if she's in love with Frank Churchill or not, very analytically.
I mean, that's the definition of a compet crush. That's like,
exactly.
I found an completely absent and unobjectionable man, and I've decided that I have a crush on him. But yeah, where I'm going with this is I think she's very insecure in her other people's affections because she knows that the Emma that exists in their head is not real. Right? She knows, and maybe their love isn't actually conditional on her being perfect because, as we already know, she's not. So like, she's not actually going to lose it. But does she know that? Yeah,
she's only 20.
Does she know that they would love her if they could acknowledge that she's flawed? And I think the snobbery is because like being upper class is the only thing she genuinely they can't take. Nobody can take that from her.
Inarguably,
that's always true.
Yeah, that's objective. I have another angle on the snobbery.
Yes,
which is that so she does a lot of like going out and sort of paying visits to less fortunate people and whatever, and like doing charity. Like that's a thing that she does. And yet she is still super lonely. And so she sees lots of people. And I think one of the things is that like, as she is lonely, she has to have a reason why she hasn't made friends with all these people that could have fixed her problem. And snobbery is the answer to that. Well, of course I couldn't be friends with you, Harriet, if you were this. Because if I were to admit that was a possibility, I'd have to admit that that's a possibility I have actively been neglecting my whole life that's contributed to my misery right now.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, yeah.
That's a lot more tenuous than yours, I think, but that's also, again, going on the post hoc justification thing.
No, I think it fits very well with the kind of, she's kind of decided things are one way, and then she's had to she's had to make up a guy to be mad at. She's had to make up a story that makes sense after the fact.
Mm-hmm. And I think this book is about, like, just people telling themselves stories about other people, and then reality happens, and those stories aren't true, and they have to deal with that, and how they deal with that tells you about who they are. So, like, Elton proposing to Emma, having told himself the story about her being in love with him, which, to be fair, he had pretty decent evidence for. And then he, like, flies off the handle when it turns out that story isn't true. And he just becomes instantly a much, much worse person in every way. Whereas Emma, at the same time, realising the story she's been telling herself and Harriet about him being in love with Harriet, is apologetic and tries to fix things with the person who's been most hurt. And that, like, how do we react when our illusions about the world are shattered, essentially? And especially ones we've spun ourselves and have a lot of investment in. Yeah.
I think Knightley's another kind of interesting example of this in his like later friendship with Harriet, because
he's also telling himself the least lies out of every character, I think.
Yes, I think that's true. But I do think he maybe less makes up guys to be mad at, but I think he makes judgments, and they are quite often, I think usually the best rule of thumb with these two is that the truth is usually about halfway between where Emma and Knightley think it is.
Yeah. Or they're both right for different reasons. Like, he thinks Frank Churchill sucks, and he kind of does. Emma thinks he's fine, and he also kind of is. Yeah.
And I think he comes round to some of Emma's opinion on Harriet in that when he's like, oh, the Eltons are being mean to her, I shall rescue her. And then he makes a genuine effort to be her friend and is like, oh, actually, I see what Emma sees in her. She's really sweet. She isn't very bright. And I was probably right about her marital prospects. But you know what? Having rescued her from like somebody who's the complete opposite, I have to go, actually, I do value this more than...
one of my favourite moments from him is after he meets Augusta Hawkins. I can't remember if she's married to Mr. Elton yet. And he goes, God, she f***ing sucks. Harriet would have been a much better wife, although now that I know what I know about Mr. Elton, I'm glad she didn't marry him.
Yeah.
He's just like, you know what, Emma, I'll give you this one.
Yeah.
You've picked better on Elton's behalf than he did for himself.
Right, I have one last semi-serious point before we ask some fun questions, which is queer Emma queer. I'm coming back to that whole comp het crush, determined she's never gonna marry, she's never been in love with anybody.
Emma meets Harriet and is immediately like, this is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Look at her eyes. I've been bewitched by her eyes. Nobody else is good enough for her. Only I can be her friend. Let me go and try and stop her marrying anybody that she actually should marry, and just keeping her by my side. I also think her relationship with Jane Fairfax is very, do I want to do her or be her? She's like, when Frank is very rudely being like, oh, I think she looks sick, she's not that pretty, Emma's like, excuse you, she's f***ing gorgeous, what's wrong with you? Even though she has spent like her entire internal monologue being like, I don't like Jane Fairfax. I know I should, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with her, but also I just don't like her. But instantly is like, no, she's so pretty, she's so clever, how dare you say rude things about her? Why do I have these strangely intense feelings towards this woman who is inarguably beautiful and talented and my age, and I should have been closer to her, but I'm not, and I feel weirdly guilty about it.
Yeah. I've got to say, I think, given that the way that Emma works out that she's in love with Knightley is very like, I've been in love with him this whole time, but I've been hiding it from myself, essentially. I think you can make that same argument about Jane Fairfax. I think she should have married Jane Fairfax. Think Frank Churchill and the guy that like said he fell in love with me when I was 13. I'm actually gonna.
So apparently Austen told her family that, and this isn't canon because it's not in the book, right? But that apparently Jane Fairfax was supposed to have died a couple of years after the book ends of either like tuberculosis or childbirth, and I'm like, okay, yeah, no, thank you. At least one of those wouldn't be an issue if she married Emma, right? So.
Yeah. And also it tracks nicely with that. I do think Frank Churchill is very much a foil to Emma in that, like, in a lot of ways, he's in a very similar position to her.
Well, she brings this up. She says to him, we both happen to have found ourselves engaged to people who are much too good for us.
Yes. But like I think there's other, so the fact that they're both by some standards well off, free and independent, and in other ways very dependent on the whims of a fractious and unwell relative in order for that, you know, to have that, to actually be able to act on that freedom.
Yes, it's got strings attached.
The fact that they respond to that by playing games and telling lies.
Well, she says to him as well, like, that they're alike.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like if Jane Fairfax, if you want to marry somebody that's going to give you financial security and has actually learned from the whole around and find out of this entire novel, seriously, just marry Emma. I'm just saying. Yeah, that's my hot thesis statement on this book is Emma, lesbian, actually should marry Jane Fairfax. And that's that on that.
I mean, who do you guys want to fight in this book?
Mrs. Elton.
Mr. Elton.
Because Mr. Woodhouse.
I don't know that I want to fight him.
Okay,
but...
I'm gonna put up a semi-serious defense of Mr. Woodhouse very quickly, and then I will explain why I want to fight Mr. Elton. But the thing is, I think you can read him as being very selfish and as being somebody who, like, should just buck up and do better and not be relying on Emma for everything and not needing to be managed this way. But I also think you can make an argument, particularly from a kind of a modern standpoint on sort of mental health, that, you know, Emma's his carer, you know, and that he's in a very, like, I don't know. I think it rubs me up the wrong way a little bit, because I think if my brainworm suddenly got worse, we might cut this bit, I'm just going to get it out. If my brainworms got worse, not being able to leave the house and needing other people to perform eldritch rituals in order for me to feel comfortable is the worst case scenario for me. Yeah,
having somebody who would take over that part of your life and make that tolerable. It's reasonable for not to not want that to go away.
Yeah, and the hypochondria and the, like, yeah, this I'm looking at my own worst case scenario in a lot of ways with Mr. Woodhouse. So I've got a lot more time for...
we don't know how Mrs. Woodhouse died, right? She died
true.
While Emma was quite young. And it's pretty easy to read into the idea that he was very dependent on her for the same things that Emma does now. And he may be absolutely terrified of more members of his family just, like, passing away from illness. Like, he's so concerned about health, not just for himself, but for everybody else. Like, it, you know, I can see that I could understand that of having a very traumatic effect on him.
Yeah,
like his wife just dying suddenly or something.
I feel sympathetic to him because he has clearly had, like, a hand from life. But from Emma's perspective, I really pity her because she has to, like, manage him and emotionally manage him.
I don't disagree that I think it's a valid reading.
I think I kind of want to be like, okay, if this was like, you need to go to the therapy doesn't exist, and I know you're going to go and see your doctor for your, like, ailments and your hypochondria, but yeah, maybe just don't shoulder this all on your 21-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's not her responsibility. I think that's why I want to fight him. And then Mr. Elton's just a dick.
Oh, he's just such a dick. He's just constantly...
I hate him.
Yeah, anybody who's mean to Harriet, I'm like, I will throw down in 2 seconds.
I'll fight
also, anybody, I don't care.
The fact that he just thinks Emma's in love with him, and I'm like, mate, she's just being nice to you.
Especially when, like, we have her whole internal monologue being like, this guy sucks. I wish he'd stop talking.
And what sucks is, like, it still happens now. Like, it's happened to me multiple times, and you're just like, I want to leave now. Please let me
the mortifying
leave.
ordeal of somebody thinking you're into them when you're not.
And it's like, you're just being nice. That's the worst thing. You're treating people no different to anybody else, and they get it in their head, and it's like, no, I wish to exit the situation.
The one I get is the, like, I used to get accused of flirting with people when actually all I'd been doing was thinking that their dissertation was really interesting. I'm a nerd. I get very excited about this stuff, and then people will be like, oh, you're really getting on with him, aren't you? Wink, wink. And I'd be like,
no.
Oh God, did he think I was flirting? Oh God, that wasn't what I meant at all. I just, you know, and like, there's one of the things I think that made this book quite hard to read for me is there was a lot of, like, very relatable not knowing what's going on in social situations and misjudging people's intent towards you, whether romantic or otherwise, that I was just like, oh no, I hate this. Actually.
So Emma does flirt with him, like she does. And if she was being more self-aware, she would realise that to anybody who isn't telling themselves the story of this guy is in love with Harriet, that is true. So I would push back slightly on that she was just being nice to him like she was being nice to anyone. However, he is incredibly entitled and a dick, and he only gets worse.
Although I've got to say, it's interesting because I mean, this is one of the things that I'm kind of like, I don't think it counts as flirting if you don't mean it that way. Which I know is like, I know we kind of like the whole intentions versus effects thing.
She doesn't unintentionally give him evidence to support the story he tells himself, though. I would say he's not acting entirely unreasonably to assume that she is interested in him. He's wrong and he handles it terribly.
Yeah, I guess like I'm sympathetic when she's like, what the hell did I do in the carriage?
Oh yeah,
and it's like it's a constrained situation. Just like no.
Oh, and he absolutely ignores hints to the contrary afterwards. Once she has realised that that's a risk, she gives him very strong no signals, and he ignores them, and that is on him, absolutely. I would fight Mrs. Elton, because she is just so bloody rude.
Oh, she's also
She's
awful.
so rude in every situation she's in, she makes it worse.
And like the whole, I really, really, really did not like the whole, I've gotten I've gotten Jane Fairfax a job, and now I've put her in the position where I've like accepted a job for her. And she hasn't had any choice in it. I mean, I think Jane does eventually say, yeah, but it's very heavily implied that if Jane hadn't changed her mind because she thought that Churchill was going to break off their engagement, that she would have just ended up in that job anyway, because Mrs. Elton simply wouldn't take no for an answer. Accepted on her behalf, which is a fucking dick move.
Yes. She's just constantly rude. She's cruel to Harriet for no actual reason. She's so obviously insecure about, just, ugh.
Also, she keeps calling her husband my lord and master, and that makes me want to hurl.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Who's the mansplain, who's manipulate, and who's male wife?
Oh, Jesus. Mansplain, there's so many good candidates, I feel.
Manipulate, I think, has to go to Emma. To a degree.
Yeah?
Well, other people
honestly,
do
I feel like
manipulate.
Mrs. Elton is mansplain, even though she's not a man.
Yeah, I think she's
constantly explaining other people's situations to them, or thinking that she knows more.
Deciding that she's the expert on things when actually she later turns out to be totally incorrect.
Yeah, male wife is Mr. Weston, I think.
Yeah. No, I'm down with that.
I'm trying to think of who else is just like, I love my wife.
It's pretty much just him. Like, I think Mr. John Knightley probably does love his wife, but he's just so taciturn that you're just never going to get any.
Yes.
Who? Yeah.
Is there anybody else for male wife? Not really.
No, I don't think so. Not in this book. Who's the only human in the Muppets adaptation of this book?
That's a hard one for this, actually.
Yeah, I don't know. Because, like, I don't want to make the main couple... Oh!
the doctor.
Oh, yeah, no, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Although I missed the opportunity to have Bunsen and Beaker turn up and pretend to be doctors and just be very bad at it and also blow things up in the background. I think that adds a certain spice to Mr. Woodhouse being like, oh, Perry's super reliable. Perry's the best doctor ever. You gotta listen to Perry all the times. And in the background, they've just like fired Beaker out of a cannon again.
Is Jane Fairfax a funny answer for that? She has to pretend to be like in love with Kermit.
Yeah, that is pretty good. I do like that. I was gonna actually put a wild card in for Mr. Woodhouse.
Yeah.
Because he's kind of like sitting in the background of a lot of these things. I feel like he's...
You have it be Michael Caine playing it like fully like straight face, like Shakespearean.
I gotta say, I really liked the way the most recent adaptation did him.
Oh, Bill Nighy?
Yeah, I thought that was actually
where he and Emma are sort of in cahoots.
Oh my god,
yeah.
I made a note that like I watched the 2020 version of Emma and I thought that adaptation hit the nail on the head for basically the main beats and themes.
Yeah.
I love that they had like the servants constantly like in the background of scenes and as observers.
Yes, I loved it.
And like that's very true to the style of comedy in the book.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the comedy is excruciatingly awkward.
Yes.
And I think that I very much liked the way, and the fact that they brought in the themes of classism that way as well,
yes.
I thought was very, very clever.
Like, who gets to be a real person, who gets to be a plaything, and who isn't even that, and is just not acknowledged by the narrative at all.
Anyway, yeah, the kind of the inherent ridiculousness of being rich, which I think is in a lot of ways is what this novel is about to some, or the inherent ridiculous of being a rich young woman with too much free time.
Must be in want of matchmaking opportunities.
Yeah. But also I think it actually made me a lot more sympathetic towards Emma in that I think because you're outside of it, you don't get a lot of the inward sort of snobbery and being rude about people and the pettiness. But you do see a lot of the kind of vulnerability of her not wanting to lose her friends. And so I think they managed to keep a lot of her, like they managed to keep her flaws very accurately while actually making me care about her a lot more genuinely than I think. Like from in the book, I'm sort of like intellectually I understand why this is happening and I think it's like well written and interesting, but emotionally I'm not attached to Emma particularly. But the film got me there, and I thought that was very well done.
You guys, what do you think our darling dear Gothmog would give this book out of 10?
I'm going for like a 3 because there's not. I mean, I don't know, maybe even lower. There's not.
There is a ribbon shop mentioned.
There is a ribbon shop.
There are no
actual cats. There's no murder. There's lying, but it's not fun lying.
There's not really any backstabbing either, like not to the degree of like Death on the Nile backstabbing.
No.
I think it's a low.
I think it's like a 2 or a 3.
I think it's quite a low rating. I think it's a very accomplished and well-written novel. I think it's extremely clever and one of Austen's best works, even if I personally did not get on with it very well.
100%.
However, cat rating, it's like a 2.
Cat rating, I think it's going to have to be a 2.
Well, I can say this when it comes to cat rating also. So when I started reading this afternoon, I started out by doing the thing I sometimes do of starting to read to the cat.
Nice.
And she left.
Oh,
She
okay.
left,
So I
like,
think that's
immediately.
a clear low cat rating then for Emma.
Yeah. I'll give it a 2, probably.
Yeah, I'm happy with a 2.
I think I'm happy with the 2 as well. What else have you guys been reading or consuming or vibing with, TM?
Not a lot, honestly. I've been watching a lot of like knitting content on YouTube. I've been going hard on my knitting hyperfixation. So I've been watching a podcast called Wool Needles Hands by Taylor, I've forgotten her last name, who is also like an indie wool dyer. And I've been really enjoying that. I've just like lots of different knitting content and crochet content and like how to spin, how small farms turn their sheep's fleeces into like finished yarn, and me being like, am I going to buy a spinning wheel? I don't have space for a spinning wheel. That's been my thing over the last couple of weeks. That's my comfort content.
Nice.
Yeah, no, I have just been listening to Taylor Swift on loop.
Ha!
That's me. That's
Fair
me.
enough.
Yeah, that's my life. And I watched the Emma film.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's it. It's been a quiet week for me. How about you, Em?
I'm rereading The Madness of Angels by Kate Griffin, which is an urban fantasy about a city sorcerer who comes back from the dead, semi-possessed, semi-body sharing with the blue electric angels that live in the telephone wires. And together they solve crime. And it's very good. I like it a lot. I'd forgotten how just the writing's just so good. You know, like there's this whole thing they've got going with a switch between I and we pronouns when it's original flavor Matthew Swift the sorcerer talking versus the angels. That's a lot of fun.
I like that.
Because you have, and it's kind of unclear whether Matthew actually knows they're there for a lot of as far as I've gotten into it. So you'll have these conversations where Matthew's like, I'm talking perfectly reasonably to this person, and then the angels will just cut in to threaten to kill them. And then Matthew will be really surprised that everybody's suddenly scared of him. He's like, I didn't say anything. I don't know why you look so freaked out. And the angels were like, we'll get you. We'll f***ing get you, mate. This is very funny. And they're scared of dentists for some reason, which is hilarious to me.
They're made of teeth, that's why.
Next time, we're going to chat about Gideon the Ninth by Tasmin Muir, I think.
It's Tamsin.
Oh, you're going to have a lot of fun with the names in that book. I'm very sorry in advance.
No, I've got the audiobook. It's going to be great. I'm actually going to be able to pronounce things correctly rather than having like a messed up idea of what the names are. But if you enjoyed this episode, please remember to give it a like or review on your podcast platform. It does mean the world to us. And if you've got any recommendations for books you want to recommend us, you can email us at teachingmycattoread@gmail.com. Also remember, end of this series, we've got an FAQ. So if you send in your questions that you'd like to ask, then we will add those to our list of questions, which we're going to answer in the Q&A. And yeah, make sure to follow us on all our socials too, because they're growing and that's exciting as the chief social media person for the podcast. But yes, say hello, send us a message and recommend us some books to read. Big virtual hugs, and we will see you next time. Bye!